She chose the injured wolf no one wanted. By morning, the Alpha King was kneeling at her door. The storm came in fast that night, the kind that rattled windows and turned the mountain road into a river of mud. Wren Calloway had just locked up the small animal clinic where she worked when she heard something scratching near the back door. She almost ignored it, thinking it was a branch blown loose by the wind, but the sound came again, low and pained, and she knew an animal was in trouble. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped out into the rain. There, curled against the wall, was a massive gray wolf. Its side was torn open, and blood mixed with the rainwater pooling beneath it. The wolf lifted its head weakly when the light hit its eyes, and for a moment, Wren froze. She had treated dogs, cats, even the occasional deer that wandered too close to town, but never a wolf, and never one this big. Most people would have run. Wolves were rare in these parts, and the ones people whispered about were not the kind you wanted to meet in the dark. But Wren had always been the person who couldn't turn away from something hurting, no matter how frightening it looked. She had spent her whole life taking in the animals nobody else wanted. This was simply another one of those nights. She knelt beside the wolf, speaking softly, the way she did with frightened patience. "It's all right. I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf's eyes, a deep amber color, watched her carefully, but it did not snap or growl. It simply breathed, shallow and slow, as if it had used the last of its strength just to survive the walk here. Getting a wolf that size into the clinic alone was nearly impossible, but adrenaline and stubbornness carried her through it. She dragged an old blanket under its body and pulled with everything she had, inch by inch, until she got it through the door and onto the metal table in the back room. By the time she was done, she was soaked, shaking, and covered in mud, but the wolf was inside, out of the storm. She worked through the night. She cleaned the wound, which looked less like an animal attack and more like something deliberate, something made by claws that knew exactly where to cut to cause pain without killing. She stitched what she could, wrapped the rest, and stayed by its side long after the storm passed, checking its breathing every hour like she would for any patient fighting to live. By early morning, exhaustion finally pulled her into a chair beside the table, and she fell asleep with her hand resting near the wolf's paw. She woke to the sound of engines outside. Through the window, she saw 2 dark trucks parked across the street, and several men standing near them, watching the clinic like they were waiting for something. She didn't know who they were, but something about the way they stood, still and alert, made her uneasy. When one of them stepped toward the door, she moved quickly to lock it, some instinct telling her not to let anyone near the wolf until she understood what was happening. A knock came, calm and steady, unlike the aggressive pounding she expected. She opened the door only enough to see through the gap. The man standing there was unlike anyone she had seen in town before. Tall, composed, with an unshakable stillness about him, like a mountain that didn't need to raise its voice to command respect. His eyes swept past her, toward the back room, and something in his expression shifted, tightened, like a man bracing for news he already feared. "I heard someone found an injured wolf last night," he said. His voice was quiet, but carried a weight that made her want to answer honestly. "I did," Wren said carefully. "He was hurt badly. I've been taking care of him." The man exhaled, something between relief and disbelief crossing his face. Without warning, he lowered himself to one knee right there on her doorstep, in full view of the street, in front of his own men. Wren blinked, startled. "What are you doing?" "You saved my brother's life," he said. "I owe you a debt I can never fully repay." For a moment, she thought she misheard him. "Your brother?" He nodded once. "His name is Reese. I am Cade. I lead the pack in these mountains, though I imagine that means nothing to you yet." It meant nothing, and yet everything about his presence told her it should. She stepped back to let him in, still unsure what she had gotten herself into, but certain that whoever this man was, he was telling the truth about at least one thing. The wolf in her back room was not just an animal. He was someone's family. Inside, Cade knelt beside the table where Reese lay, resting a hand gently on his brother's fur. Reese's eyes opened halfway, exhausted but alert enough to recognize him. Something passed between them, an old pain neither spoke aloud, but Ren could feel it in the room like a held breath. "He's been gone for years," Cade said quietly, almost to himself. "I thought I would never see him again." Ren didn't ask what that meant yet. She simply said, "He needs rest. Whatever happened between you, it can wait until he's strong enough to survive it." Cade looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. Most people who learned who he was either feared him or tried to use it for their own gain. She had done neither. She had simply done her job, the way she always did, treating a frightened, wounded creature with the same care she gave every patient who came through her door. "You didn't know who he was," Cade said, "and you helped him anyway." "He was hurt," she said simply. That was enough. Over the following days, Cade returned again and again, first to check on his brother, then, though he told himself otherwise, to see Ren. She was nothing like the people in his world, people who postured and calculated every word for advantage. She spoke plainly. She looked him in the eye without flinching, even after she learned exactly how much power he held and exactly how much fear surrounded his name in the wilder places of the mountain. Rhys healed slowly, his strength returning day by day under Ren's steady care. As the wounds closed, the truth of what happened came out in pieces. Rhys had been cast out years earlier after a bitter rivalry over who would lead the pack. Bitter words had turned into worse actions, and Cade, young and afraid of losing control, had exiled his own brother rather than risk a war within the pack. Rhys had lived alone since then, hunted more than once by those loyal to Cade, who saw him as a lingering threat. The attack that brought him to Ren's door had been the closest call yet, a group of loyalists deciding to finish what exile had started. Ren listened to all of it without judgment, though her heart ached for both men. She had spent her life caring for creatures others gave up on, but she had never imagined that the biggest wound she would ever treat wouldn't be physical at all. It was the space between two brothers who loved each other and had still let years of silence turn into distance too painful to cross. "You should talk to him," she told Cade one evening, as Rhys slept peacefully nearby, finally out of danger. Not as an alpha talking to a rival, just as a brother. Cade was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if he'll listen." "You won't know until you try," she said. "Isn't that worth the risk?" He looked at her, something softening in his usually guarded expression. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," she said. "It's just not easy. Those are different things." Her words stayed with him. The next morning, when Rhys was finally strong enough to sit up on his own, Cade sat beside him and, for the first time in years, spoke honestly about the fear that had driven him to exile his own brother rather than face the possibility of losing everything to him. Rhys listened, wary at first, but the years of anger softened as he realized his brother wasn't there to reclaim power or assert dominance. He was there because he had missed him. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Old wounds don't disappear in a single conversation. But it was a beginning, one built in the quiet safety of Ren's clinic, far from the pack politics that had torn them apart in the first place. Word spread quickly among the pack that the exiled brother had returned, and not everyone welcomed the news. Some of the loyalists who had hunted Rhys before saw his return as an unfinished threat, and they weren't willing to let it go so easily. Late one night, as Rhys was regaining enough strength to walk short distances on his own, a group of them arrived at the clinic, determined to end what they believed had been left incomplete. Ren heard the commotion before she saw them, raised voices outside, followed by the unmistakable low growl of wolves preparing for a fight. She rushed to the front, just as Cade stepped between his brother and the approaching group, his voice booming with an authority that made even the boldest among them hesitate. But hesitation wasn't the same as retreat, and for a tense moment it looked as though the confrontation would turn violent despite Cade's efforts to calm his own men. Without thinking, Ren stepped outside and placed herself directly between the two sides, her hands raised, her voice steady, despite the fear pounding in her chest. "Enough," she said, loud enough for all of them to hear. "You want to hurt each other over old grudges? Fine. But you'll have to go through me first, because I didn't spend 3 days keeping that man alive just to watch you finish the job you started." The loyalists stared at her, stunned by the sight of a human standing unafraid between two groups of powerful wolves. Even Cade seemed frozen, caught between the instinct to protect her and awe at her fearlessness. Slowly, the tension broke. One of the loyalists, an older man who had clearly known both brothers since they were young, lowered his gaze first. "She's right," he said quietly. "This isn't what any of us want anymore." One by one, the others followed his lead, stepping back, some out of respect for Ren's courage, others simply exhausted by years of unresolved conflict. The confrontation ended not with violence but with silence, and for the first time in a long while, that silence felt like peace instead of tension. After the loyalists left, Cade turned to Ren, his expression a mixture of disbelief and something deeper, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. "You could have been hurt," he said, his voice rough. "So could you," she replied. "So could Rhys. I wasn't going to just stand there and let that happen." He studied her for a long moment, then, just as he had that very first morning, he knelt before her again. This time, it wasn't about a debt owed for saving his brother's life. It was something far simpler and far more difficult to say. "I don't know how to lead a pack and love someone at the same time," he admitted. "I've spent so long keeping everyone at a distance to protect them from what my position demands. But I don't want to keep you at a distance. I want you to stay, not because you're owed anything, but because I don't know how to imagine my life without you in it now." Ren felt her breath catch, the weight of his words settling over her, like something she had been waiting for, without realizing it. She thought of the frightened wolf she had found in the rain, the brothers whose pain had slowly begun to heal, and the man kneeling in front of her now, offering not power or protection, but simply himself. "I didn't choose to help Rhys, because I expected anything in return," she said softly, "but I'm not sorry it led me here." In the weeks that followed, Rhys was welcomed back into the pack, not without difficulty, but with a peace that had seemed impossible before. Cade worked to rebuild trust among those who had once hunted his brother, proving through actions, not just words, that unity mattered more than old fears. And Ren, the quiet woman who had once been known only for taking in animals no one else wanted, became something the pack hadn't expected, a reminder that courage didn't always come from strength or power, but from refusing to look away when something, or someone, needed help. She stayed, not because a king had knelt at her door, but because for the first time she had found people, wolf and man alike, who chose her back just as fiercely as she had chosen them.